I mean, for goodness sake, it's 2020 and we still have people killing people because they dislike the colour of their bloody skin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm Mark. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Nice to see you. If you're a long-time viewer, thank you as ever for your support. A little time has passed now since George Floyd was killed by a white police officer in the United States. I'm making this video this morning because, like most of you, I've been absolutely horrified by what I've been seeing the last couple of weeks since George Floyd was killed. So I thought I'd make a video just to put down my thoughts and just to try and unpack kind of what happened and what's happening now and how we move forward from here. Hopefully we can try and make some sense of all the mayhem. Please subscribe to my channel if you like this video and if you'd like to see more great content, and please leave any comments on anything that I say, because one of the reasons that I'm actually making this video is because I'm not sure exactly how I feel about everything that's happening and going on, what with the protests, the riots, thousands of people protesting whilst we've got a global pandemic of a highly contagious disease. You know, I'm conflicted about the protests during COVID. So one of the reasons I'm making this video is I'm actually trying to put down my own thoughts and see how I can unpack what exactly is going on kind of in my own head. We've seen the absolute worst of human beings. George Floyd killed horribly. I did, to my huge regret, I did watch the video, as I'm sure most of you have, of him actually being restrained and arrested and calling out for help. You know, I can't breathe. It defies belief to me that you can dislike or hate somebody so much that you can do that to another human being. Since the incident, we've seen protests, lots of them very peaceful, despite what the mainstream media has been showing you. The vast majority of the protests have been peaceful. It's just the mainstream media like to focus on the violence. Of course they do. That's what the mainstream media do. I mean, never let the mainstream media tell you the truth, right? The protests are completely understandable, of course. People are furious, they're disgusted, they're angry, they're frightened, they're anxious. Some of the rioting, of course, is completely unacceptable. People looting shops and stealing 4K TVs are not people who are there to protest about a black man being murdered. That's self-evident. One of the things that's really pissed me off the last few days, I've seen a lot of celebrities on social media offering to pay to bail out people who have been arrested for looting and assaulting police officers, which I can't get my head around. That's bizarre. Protest, yes. Be angry, yes. Get the message across as much as you can that racism is completely unacceptable and reprehensible in every way. But the second you put a brick through a window to steal a television, you have no argument left. And this is the thing that's slightly frustrating, is if you go on a protest and you have a legitimate point, the politicians and the people who are in power, they want protesters to start violence, because as soon as a protest excuse me, as soon as a protest descends into violence, you're giving those in power the excuse to dismiss your protest. I would urge anybody who's going on a protest, please don't cause violence, don't assault police officers, don't smash up shops, don't set fire to cars, because the second you do that, the very people that you're protesting against, those in power, you give them legitimate reason to dismiss your protest. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is just how can you hate somebody based on something as random as the pigmentation of their skin? And what I've been unpacking in my mind is that it's evident to me that it's not, racism to me is not about a skin colour. I think that obviously there is an entire substructure of judgment, of bigotry, of ignorance that comes with just simply viewing somebody who has different colour skin than you. And unfortunately, in a country like the US, I think that substructure of bigotry and ignorance, and it's judgments based on that guy has a different colour skin than me, so his lifestyle is such, his speech is such, the way he thinks and does things is such. And that is that's the deep substructure that I think lies beneath the colour of somebody's skin. Now, the problem for me is, how on earth do you break down that deep substructure? Because that has to be the end goal. If you want to destroy racism, that substructure has to be broken up. In a country like the US, where they have a much deeper... I don't want to say that the United States of America is institutionally racist, because I'm not American and I don't live there. If you live in the US and you believe it is institutionally racist, let me know. Let me know what you're thinking, because you can educate me. But it seems to me that America has a much longer and deeper history with racism than, say, Britain. Just because Britain has racism and racists, it doesn't make Britain a racist country. Britain, I believe, is not culturally racist. How do you defeat a substructure of racism that has been there for so long? I don't know. I mean, how the hell do you do that? It's far deeper than the pigmentation of somebody's skin. It's an entire set of judgments based on old historical bigotry, I think. So where on earth do we go from here? Inevitably, the protests will come to an end. The violence will stop. The media attention will disappear, because at the moment you cannot turn your TV on without it being all about Black Lives Matter, George Floyd. It's almost like COVID-19 has literally vanished completely the last week or 10 days. The media attention will disappear, because that's how the media work. They overdose and bombard you with one subject until they get a bit bored and decide that there's no more money and views in it, and then they move on to something else. So how do we move on? How do we sustain pressure on those in power to bring about change? Because ultimately, as valid as the protests may be, it's not the man and the woman in the street who is going to bring about change. The change can only be brought about by the people that are in power and have the power to change our institutions that are proliferating racism. And one of the problems, I think, with that is, I think there are a lot of very powerful people, and again, I'm talking mostly about the States, who have an interest in maintaining racism. See, the one thing that I've learned about studying politicians is that politicians love to maintain status quo. Racism, obviously, is part of the status quo. It's part of what is normal. Politicians love status quo. They love keeping things the way that they are. And if racism is the way that it is, there will be lots of powerful people who want to keep it. They don't want to rock the boat, right? They want to keep a boat on an even keel, not rock it. How do you convince powerful people whose interests are to maintain status quo that the status quo, i.e. racism, needs to be changed? There are also obviously a lot of powerful people, politicians, for whom playing on racism, playing on the historical ignorance and bigotry that racism is based on, actually helps them come to power. There are some politicians who quite obviously and quite openly have an audience, obviously, who agree with racism. And so those politicians, they're not going to stand up in front of anybody and denounce racism, because they know that their core supporters couldn't care less about people like George Floyd. How do you convince politicians who may have a core of voters who agree with racist ideas? How are you going to stop them from proliferating and spreading racism? Well, you're not. No politician is ever going to... If a politician recognises that lots of people who vote for him are racist, or let's say who share racist views, they might not be overtly racist, but who share racist views, no politician's going to go against that, because then you lose your core voters and then you've got nobody to vote for you. How do we move past the incendiary explosion of protests and riots and media attention to sustain pressure? Because it seems to me that there is a cycle that unfortunately is a very sad cycle. something terrible happens to a black person. I mean, Rodney King. How many years ago was Rodney King killed? Has anything really changed since Rodney King? Because now we've got Rodney King, we've got lots of people in between, and now we've got George Floyd. How do we do that? How do we keep the pressure on? Because as I said, there's a cycle. Something terrible happens to a black person. They're killed by a police officer. There's an initial explosion of anger and rage and protests. The media go nuts. And then gradually the media attention dissipates. The rage and the anger dissipates. And then everything kind of goes quiet. In the meantime, black people and people of colour continue to suffer racism. And then it may be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, until there's another big media frenzy about a black person being killed by police officers, and then it all starts again. But in the meantime, everybody else has just gone kind of back to just keep doing what we were doing before. I don't know the answer to that question. How you sustain the pressure. I guess it's got something to do with we have to teach very young people to stand up for themselves and stand up for their rights, because the only way that you can sustain pressure on a movement over time is to have young people coming in and acting like the next wave. As people get older, you need young people coming in to sort of push the movement on, and I think that's the way to do it. We've got to do a better job of educating young people about the issues and struggles that people face in the world, so that they can become the people that continue to put pressure on the politicians. But if we don't keep putting pressure on the people in power, nothing will ever change. It doesn't matter how many people protest. If protests last for 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months, and then they stop, the politicians will all just sit back, breathe a sigh of relief, and then say, well, the streets are clean again. We can just go back to staying as we are. But staying as we are is not acceptable when you have police officers kneeling on people's necks and killing them, even whilst they're being filmed. I think one of the things that really struck me about watching George Floyd suffering and ultimately being killed, the fact that the police officer and the other officers involved must have known they were being filmed. How on earth do you do what you do to George Floyd if you're wearing a body cam? And of course, the video that I saw was being shot by somebody, a bystander. I'm not sure who actually shot that film, if it was a bystander or a friend of George Floyd's or whoever, but they obviously had their phone out or they had a camera with them. How do you do that to someone when you're being filmed? The police officer that killed George Floyd, he must have known he was being filmed. He must have. How do you do that? Well, I guess the answer to that is he probably felt like he lived in a society where what he was doing wouldn't be punished. And I think that says a lot about that society. This guy felt that he could put his knee into the back of somebody's neck and essentially choke them to death whilst he was being filmed. He obviously felt that there would be no punishment. What does that say about society? Well, I don't know, but I do know it doesn't say anything good. That's just my thoughts. My thoughts aren't particularly coherent and clear. I'm using this video a great deal just to talk to you guys, because I want to know what you think. How do we move forward from this? How do we sustain the pressure on the people in power? Let me know in the comments. If you've agreed with anything I've said, if you haven't agreed with anything I've said, let me know. If I've said anything that's not accurate, please let me know, because the one thing that I don't want to be doing is adding inaccuracies to a subject that's already, full of inaccuracies and people trying to put spin on things. Please share the video if you feel like I've said anything that other people might want to see. Come and join me over at Instagram. My Instagram account is veganmark_01. It's Sunday morning. I'm going to go for a nice long walk and try and relax and make myself feel a little bit better about what's going on in the world. So do the same if you're feeling a bit down. Thank you for watching.